Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Please help me welcome our panelists for today's discussion. I'm joined by Aleshia Hayes, a course director in the Mobile Gaming Master's degree. I'm joined by Anthony Colangelo from Big Cartel. He is an iOS developer. And I'm joined by Josh Jonlin, a department chair in the Mobile Development degree. My name is Joseph DeSetto. I'm the program director of the Mobile Development degree. Today we're going to talk about wearables and some other extensions of mobile technology. So to start with, let's talk about how we got here. A couple of years ago, the phone was the only real known wearable, wearable in terms of put it in your pocket, but true mobile technology. So how did we get to suddenly we're talking about watches and headbands and all sorts of things? So go ahead.
Yeah, I think you said it when you said wearable with a phone and you put it in your pocket. So what you find is that, and I give this speech, so if you've heard this in overview or something, I apologize, but the 5-minute version of it is every evolution of technology solves some kind of problem that we have. And we start with recording data on paper. So papyrus solves the permanence problem of data. Then the problem with that is speed and replication. So you have the printing press that comes out and takes permanence and then allows you to get things out there faster. And then speed and instantaneousness comes next with radio. And then the problem with radio is there's no visual content, so you get TV. And then TV is unidirectional, so we need interactivity, and that's where the web comes from. Web, you're sitting there staring at a desk, browsing things. We need it to be mobile. We need it to be on our person at all time. And so now the problem is with mobile, where we got to now with wearables, is just how we access it. It's the computer interaction side of things, where taking out a physical device and interrupting our flow of what we do on any given day, we just kind of moving past that as a people. So we need something more accessible that doesn't distract from what we're doing anyways.
So Anthony, since you graduated from the web degree here and have worked for some major agencies, are we there yet? Are major clients actually looking to do interesting things with wearables yet, or is it a lot of TechCrunch hype and it's really several years out before we really start to see some interesting uses of these things?
It's a little bit of, probably a little bit of both, to be honest. I think one of the key issues is that nobody's really sure what we're going to do with wearables yet, just because there aren't enough out there. If you had this conversation about mobile phones in 2006, our guesses for where mobile phones and mobile technology would be going is very different, because the iPhone changed a lot of things, because it got a device that was entirely different out in people's hands, and that changed everyone's expectations for what a phone should be. People's expectation in even I guess December 2006, right before the iPhone was announced, their expectations of what their phone does was very different than in June 2007 when they got their hands on it. And I think we're at that point now where we know the Apple Watch is coming out soon. We've been wearing Pebbles and Android Wear for a little while, so we're still in the early phase where I don't think enough people have had them on their wrists yet to know exactly what they want to do with it. And in the same vein, people that are running these larger organizations in the world to know what they need to give their customers. So there's a lot of, the management at a lot of larger organizations are aware that wearables are a future thing that should be happening, and they ask a lot of questions about what they can do with them. But the truth is, we're just approaching the time when it's going to be hitting the ground running.
Yeah, to add on to that, we don't even know what wearables are yet. Last year, I was sitting here, I think at this very room, giving a talk on Google Glass, and I was part of the Explorer program, and big into that, and had a lot of people in the audience that were really engaged in what exactly that meant and what it was Google Glass going to do. And I sat up here like some kind of expert spouting a whole bunch of words about this is where it's going, it's going to be awesome, and then it's gone now. It's just a year later. Yeah, it exists, it's rolled under Nest and everything like that, but watches are where we're kind of migrating currently. And I think a lot of that has to do with that interaction component. Maybe Aleshia can chime in on that, but I got tired of getting stared at, and my watch does almost everything that my glass did for me, minus letting me record my kids and stuff like that. And maybe that's a significant event that I'm willing to take out my device an interrupt for. Maybe not. Maybe that's something future.
So Aleshia, you're an expert in using these devices in interaction. What's going to help us define what of these devices is successful and what's next?
Well, I think what's really interesting is like how Josh brought up the evolution, and there are these demands that they say of human-computer interaction where we're looking for things to be invisible or transparent, so like that you don't actually notice that you're interfacing with something. And you can see that like with the watch, which is so much different than the glass, because the glass like draws so much attention to you, like you were saying. And then we look for them to be intuitive, and of course you can see by handing a child, like a 3-year-old, your iPhone or your iPad, like how intuitive it is. And then the last thing, when we look at human-computer interaction that we look at is how cognitively complex it is. And I think that's probably the area that we're all trying to still work on, and why we focus so much on usability in all of the programs.
So what's next for our phones if we're doing a lot of the tasks that we currently assign to our phones with our watch or whatever's post-watch?
Maybe Anthony said it best, is we just don't know.
Thank you for coming.
Well, I mean, last year we talked about all these like applications for glass, and while I still have glass, and I'm still actually working on glass and glass-related products professionally for clients, they're very targeted towards one-off proprietary tasks. It's not like a consumer-level product, and that's just kind of how it's evolved. With watches, it's a little bit different. You know, my watch tells me 12 times a day that I'm fat, and that I need to walk more. And so, I mean, I think health is a big part of it. I think that's where a lot of these things are coming in. Do you guys over at Cartel, what kind of projects are you getting requests for in terms of that kind of thing?
So we have a lot of customers that are using the Big Cartel iPhone app for managing their shops and things like that, and they want to be seeing the stats of how their shop is doing throughout the day, and know when they get orders, and know how their sales are trending, so they can better manage the stock of their products that they're selling and things like that. And so, it's something that is right there, and it's easy to be aware of status of things in your life that you need to know, on a quick basis. So I think that's kind of what we've have our heads around of the initial phase of wearables is it's a little bit extra awareness. And I think it's important to remember that every time a new device or technology comes out, it never really, like in device categories, we had computers, and then we had phones, then we had tablets, and we keep adding these devices to the things that we use every day. But yes, I can do everything on my phone that I can do on my computer, hypothetically, but I still use both. And I still use my tablet for things, and I still use my phone for things. And I haven't truly replaced an entire class of devices with one other yet. It's kind of just adding to this collection of expensive things I have in a bag for some reason, and I probably could get rid of a few. But wearables is another thing that is coming in, as it's going to be another device that you're using, and it's going to have different things that it's capable of because of its different context. But I don't see us just getting rid of our phones because we have something smaller on our wrist. But it's definitely, right now it's the companion type thing, but I see that separating in once we get it on our wrist and it coming into its own as its own device with its own SDK. Right now, the Apple Watch SDK is all about companion apps. So you have to have an app on your phone that pushes over to the watch. When the Watch SDK, the actual native Watch SDK, comes out in a year, probably 2 years, you're going to be able to build full-featured apps on your watch standalone from your phone. So it will come into its own as its own device, but we don't know what it will do yet, which is what we keep getting back to.
Well, Aleshia, you mentioned cognitive complexity. How is that looked at by researchers in terms of like, are they thinking in terms of, well, you'll use a watch plus you have all these other things to worry about. You have a screen next to you. You have a screen in your car. You have screens you're passing when you're driving, and it's just overload, or is it just, or are they looking ahead to, how much complexity can you handle on that single watch?
Well, a lot of the research looks even at like neural patterns and how much actual activity is going on in your brain, and so that's where a lot of the really interesting user research is going, where it's actually looking at how much can we process at one time. So and they talk a lot about like gathering spaces and where you have things on one device and another device, and how much cognitive complexity it's taking you just to task switch. Like, is that on my phone or is that on my computer? Which is why, of course, the cloud is awesome. But then, of course, that brings up new concerns about security, which I think related to the question that you asked before about how do we know where it's going. Josh said it best when he said, the technology solves problems, and technology is supposed to solve problems. So where is it going? Well, look at the problems you're having and solve them, and that's the opportunity that we all have right now.
You just said something that kind of reminded me. I think one of the things that we can be sure of, and actually Joe shared with me an article a while ago about tasks, and you said it yourself. Mobile apps now, and for the longest time, have been attempting to replace websites, right? So you had some website which did a whole bunch of stuff. But in my evolution talk, I just got done talking about how you would sit at a desk for an hour or two and peruse the content of the web. People don't sit there, unless you're him, people don't sit there on their mobile devices for an hour at a time perusing, right? That's not their intent.
It's kind of my job.
That is
kind of what I do here.
I didn't say it was bad. I just said, yeah. But so mobile, what you're seeing is this hyper-focused kind of niche development, right? So you take an app that maybe was a website with dozens of pages, and maybe it doesn't make sense for that to be an entire app anymore, right? So you have Facebook that broke off the messaging feature. Whether we hate it or love it, I hate it personally. I think whatever. But they had a reason for doing that, in that they saw messaging different from the social sharing aspect of it, and they think that there should be two different apps. This does not distract your time. With mobile, it takes it a step further, right? I get my notifications about my email on my watch, but I'm not necessarily sitting there clicking the header, reading the content, following links, browsing everything out. When I need that level of engagement with the data, I take my device out. That's back to what Anthony said about you don't replace entirely a device. They're complementary right now. So I think with one thing that Apple tends to do very well is they focus on that HCI element, and you mentioned manageable chunks of data and manageable tasks. So I think one of the things that you'll see is Apple's going to force developers to start thinking about these wearable engagements at that minor level instead of the macro level that we've kind of gotten away with using mobile apps so far, where you're hyper-focused on what you're trying to do and getting it across in such a small amount of time, which could be less than a couple seconds, and on a very small form factor. And once we start doing that, you'll see these apps even break apart into multiple apps, even apps that we use all the time.
I mean, to me, it seems like it's going to be a tougher sell, because as you get into a quicker and quicker experience, what actual problem are we solving? I mean, do you all have examples where you really feel like you have a wearable, whether it's a Pebble or Android, any of the Android Wear stuff, that really you say, I can now do this because I have this wearable device? I mean, I feel like we've solved problems for joggers. Like we have lots of ways to track heart rate now, and that's really as far as actual problem solving with this is going. So what's some other examples?
I'm going to go slightly off topic first and get back to examples.
Okay.
So a couple years ago at BuildConf, which is, I don't know if it still runs anymore, but there was a designer named Wilson Miner, and I think he designed Apple.com actually. He was part of that team, and then he moved on to Ardio and things like that. And he had a talk called When We Build, and the video is available online. I highly suggest watching it. In it, he talks about the infrastructure that shaped the lifestyle of Americans over the past couple hundred years. And he talks about, in the 1800s, society was based around railroads. Railroads became a thing that were built out all throughout the country, and society started forming itself around those things. And they connected people from place to place, and it led people out west and to lands that haven't really been populated yet at that point. And then in the 1900s, cars came around, and we started building roads. And then World War II happened, so we built a highway system. And then roads became the thing that connected society, and society was organized around roads and highways and systems like that. And it started out on big highways that got to a different spot of the area of the country that then needed smaller roads, and then they needed dirt roads to get even more down into that different little neighborhood and type. And then in the 2000s, we're getting into an area where society is organized and connected around screens, and screens are the new infrastructure of society. And it's in the same way that roads filled every corner of America. in the 1900s. Screens are now filling every corner of our society these days, and we're putting it in places that we haven't had screens before.
That's really deep.
It's very deep. It's a great talk. Not my idea. I didn't give this talk, but it makes you think a lot because it makes you realize, back then when they were building out the first highways or even the first railroads back in the 1800s, they could have said, well, we've solved problems for people that ship a lot of goods. We've solved problems for merchants. But as that might have been the first thing that they were solving a problem for, but eventually we got passenger trains and subways and things like that. And the same thing with roads. We solve problems for the military because they can get things around on highway systems when, we're in a world of strife like that. And I think that's just the natural progression of building out infrastructure like this. The first problems that you see being solved with a technology isn't necessarily applicable to you, but somebody has to start doing it. You see that with, let's go even higher up, you go see space travel. There's not that many people that go up into space these days, but hopefully someday that will be the case. So I think, I don't know how much we can judge a technology based on the initial problems, because joggers are doing pretty well these days. But I think, if that's where it has to start, that's where it has to start, and it will get to the wide population eventually.
I think we tend to create our own problems. My phone's in my pocket, and an audience member just texted me, and I was able to check that text without looking like I was on.
Stop it,
on
Revis.
camera. So I see a couple big screen phones up here. When the iPhone first came out, it was 4 inches, and then now it's 3.5 actually, and now it's up to 6, right? With the big edition. My Nexus is also a 6-inch screen. Not having to get that in and out of my pocket all the time. It seems like it's a first world problem, but it's a problem, and I don't have to anymore because I have a watch. Texts while I'm driving. Effectively, your watches are, if you really want to stretch it, saving lives. You glance at your wrist while your hands are still on the wheel versus trying to be distracted by a screen. GPS directions, those kind of things. Sometimes problems aren't necessarily negative problems, but more just efficiency improvements. So some of the wearable stuff is going to be, for example, the project I'm working on with Glass right now is an efficiency improvement. It's not like a problem that doesn't already have a solution. It's just that this is going to get it done better. So I think a lot of wearable things are going to be improving architectures or processes that already exist and taking them to the next step. And then, eventually, like Anthony said, I think that's going to introduce more problems that need to be solved later on.
But what's going to be that breakout app? Go ahead.
I was interviewing Rusty Simsprat, who is one of our graduates, earlier today, and he gave a really good example that I would not have even thought of. And he said he uses mobile tech to supervise his employees sometimes because he works from home and they're there, so they do a lot of checking in and things like that through mobile, which that's a new way that I think is probably really beneficial and makes everyone have a better work-life balance, being able to work from home and work remotely. So I'd say that's one that's pretty applicable, hopefully, to all of us.
I think if you follow Bill Gates at all, which is a good guy to follow, by the way, he talks a lot about emerging markets. I think there's a lot of focus on the U.S. and what our problems are versus what the problems abroad are. And I think sometimes mobile tech makes certain things easier. For example, banking in third world countries was nearly impossible until the mobile phone came across and allowed them to do actually communication on the fly. So when you separate the mindset of kind of what it's like to be in the U.S. versus what it's like being in some other places, I think the breakouts are going to be there first, actually.
So the apps, if you think back to the iPhone when it came out, the apps that made the iPhone big, so you're saying the Angry Birds of Apple Watch or of Android Wear could very well be something that's a soccer game in Africa? Or what are some examples like that you foresee that are your use cases for these things that maybe we personally, sitting here in a air-conditioned room in America, have no use for, but maybe someone else might?
You watch what Apple's focuses are these days with Touch ID and those kind of kits, and you talk about security and transactions. I think a lot of it's going to be integrating wearables into daily life. So you go and you hold your watch up and pay. That's what they showed at the WWDC last year. It's those kind of things. It's things that we take for granted that are currently impossible just because of the infrastructures in these other places that it's going to quite quickly widen that availability of what we take for granted a lot of times in terms of just simple day-to-day luxuries. So I'd say finance, it definitely has implications. Health is another big implication. The wearables and the sensors that are in wearables, you see really clever people. I think the winner of the Google engineering contest this year was a way to detect, what was it, diabetes?
Yep.
Yeah.
Blood sugar levels.
Yeah, through a breathalyzer or something like that. You don't even have to take, so I think when you look at that kind of stuff, it's like spreading that kind of awareness. Maybe it's malaria or some other thing. And, there's a lot of things that are out there where, and again, I'm trying to think of stuff that we don't know yet. So, we keep talking about watches and glass. Glass is already dead. The watches are coming out. Maybe the next wearable is a contact lens, which, by the way, exists. So I think, these kind of things, it might be eyesight, it might be color blindness, it might be, there's a whole bunch of applications that could get applied to it.
And is that maybe what we're seeing with wearables, is that this isn't going to be a consumer level breakout product? This is the one that is going to go through enterprise and medical and established large industries and solve solve problems through those avenues, versus the iPhone, kind of happened to end up in enterprise because so many people were playing Angry Birds. It didn't solve any enterprise issue day one. It couldn't even do Microsoft Exchange email for that matter. And then, suddenly go the other way. So, are we going to see in wearables maybe that much more attention has to be paid to enterprise software and some of these other things? Is that kind of what you're seeing with the agencies?
I think health is really the big one. And I don't want to sit up here and be Mr. Apple shill or whatever, but if you watch...
No, please do.
I think if you see what's happening with HealthKit, so they announced a thing called HealthKit at the watch announcement a couple weeks ago or whatever that was. And they already have that in action. It was just kind of under wraps. They were working with a lot of higher education universities that are focused on medical. And this isn't strictly about wearables. This is using an iPhone in this case. So take that with a grain of salt as I say this. But they said one of the Stanford programs that was using HealthKit, which is a way to kind of get health data from the Apple Health app sent back to universities and researchers that are looking into different diseases. In the Stanford program, after HealthKit was announced, they had 11,000 people sign up in a 24-hour period of time after that was announced. And some people from Stanford said that would have taken visiting 50 different medical locations around the country and probably a year to get 11,000 people signed up. And again, that's with an iPhone. That's with a phone that you put in your pocket, you walk 20 steps away and back, and it sends them information about somebody that has Parkinson's. And that's about, that's a phone that you're saying into the microphone, and they're sensing micro vibrations to help research different diseases. So think about as we start strapping these things on our bodies, the health implications that we could have there, not only from just a personal level, but sending this data to researchers in a way that is still secure and respects people's privacy, which has been a big, Apple's been a big proponent of that in the last couple years, even with things like the NSA and different government agencies they've been kind of sparring with a little bit. But that's only the beginning, and we've been doing it with phones. So I'm pretty excited to see the health implications that we have as we start strapping these things on ourselves.
I got a question for Aleshia, actually. Last year in the Glass Talk, privacy was a huge thing. And I made maybe slightly arrogant statement that they're going to have to suck it up. I think that there's a paradigm kind of that we're butting up against. There's some understanding of what privacy is. Do you think from a human-computer interaction standpoint that privacy is somewhat holding back wearables in its current form?
Well, I'd say there's a couple of things in HCI that you would have to look at when it comes to privacy. One of them is the safety issue. And of course, that's definitely going to be a barrier. But the other thing is just perceptions. And one thing that I like to look at is the Gartner hype cycle. And it's about people's perceptions changing and accepting it. Kind of like, I think we had a conversation about this before. Right now, people are really weirded out if you're looking at them and you have the Google Glass on, and the first thing they're like, are you recording me? But if that becomes a trend in our society where people have these kinds of devices, then you'll start to overlook that, and you'll start to just see that as the new normal. And then hopefully we'll move to a new place in the hype cycle. So the hype cycle, by the way, is this idea that new technology comes out, people get super excited about it, and they think it's going to solve every problem in the universe. And so then everyone's like, oh, it's so great. And then somewhere after people start to see it, they're like, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And then they get all really angry about it, and they drop really low. And then comes the place where we're at probably right now with Google Glass, where it's like, there are some things that we can solve with this, and then people go to a pretty decent plateau where they start to say the technology is good. So I think once people understand the limitations, then we can overcome them.
Do you think, though, that the watches may have like a almost inverse hype cycle in the respect of, no one's really blown away with, look at all the apps that are going to be brand new and interesting for watches, but so it's almost backwards. There isn't that it's going to solve every problem. It's what problem does this solve, and then now we'll find more and more things for it as people start to wear them.
I think that's a good point, and I can't really predict that, but I think that could be.
You could say the same thing about Apple Pay or any kind of touch-to-pay system, Google Wallet, what have you. I've been using Google Wallet for 3 years. I mean, it came out about that long ago, and a lot of retailers just didn't adopt it, right? Could say the same thing about a debit card. A lot of people, what's wrong with checks? So, and I think a lot of these staple parts of our society these days started off as, what is this really solving? And people just didn't get it. But I tell you this, if I get a text message at a checkout line at a grocery store and I just check it and swipe it away real quick, I always get asked, oh, what is that? That's really cool. And when somebody says that's really cool, that's some level of hype, but it's also a level of interest where maybe there's a potential sell there. If I was a watch salesman, I would carry around 100 of these things and just check my email all the time on the spot.
You don't think people are just being polite?
No, I don't.
No. They're trying to say, wow, that's really nerdy.
They did that about my glass, yeah. No, the watch is a little bit different. The watch has a function, it tells time, but I mean.
I think that's a really good point when you say that about the watch having a function, because I was talking to a doctor actually a while ago about Google Glass, and he brought up something I hadn't even thought about Google Glass, which is you're standing there talking to someone, and then you're looking at your glass, so you're like facing someone, then you're looking off to the side, like, and they're like, what the heck are you doing? Whereas you can look at your watch and glance at it, and people don't even notice that you're ignoring them or checking your email or whatever. It just is like, oh, he's looking at his watch. So perception is, I guess, what I'm saying. Perception about these texts is like really big.
You just changed every meeting I have to have from now forever by pointing that out.
Yeah. It'll anger people if you're looking up into your glass, but when you just pull out your phone and go, yeah, that's,
well, not
fine.
your phone, but I think your watch is a little less obtrusive. You're
so far, yeah. I mean,
until everyone's
you're
doing
gonna have like heartbeats going off and all sorts of things. Would you guys see that the apps that have been introduced, mostly in the Apple keynote, just because as far as public perception, that's obviously a bigger event than the launch of various Android devices. But, well, it's just true. Sorry, I didn't make that up. But do you all see the apps that were introduced, the Heartbeat and some of these other ones, as just sort of trying to suggest to developers what's possible? Because it didn't seem to grab me as like, oh, that's something I'd use every day. I'm going to draw a cat face and then it'll redraw somewhere else. I mean, that wasn't really, especially any of us that are developers, I mean, we already know how to do that. So was it just trying to kind of feed ideas of, like this Microsoft thing we talked about, like just setting those examples of that people can then go on?
Do you want to take it? I think if you look at the first Apple announcement for the watch and the second one, they're different announcements. The first one was very much a don't buy an Android Wear device yet announcement, which they needed. They were a little bit behind and still trying to, I think even Apple, and they're the most ingenuitive, probably refining company that's out right now, needed that time to try and figure out where it was going. When you saw the second one, that stuff was very much in the back burner. It was look, this is the development side. you have the whole Steve Ballmer development thing, right? You need developers to bring their creativity to the platform to make it successful, right? And that's one of the things I think, as a school, I'm glad that we have the ability to foster that in students. But I think as a whole, the mobile community is still trying to figure out these questions that we're talking about today. Yeah, the heartbeat thing is cool, but that's a sex thing, right? It's like, look, buy this. I don't think the heartbeat thing is going to sell the watch, though. The heartbeat thing is going to get people to look at it, and then the fact that you can check your email on it, or can make you healthier, or can enable you to buy something that was previously unbuyable. I think that's what's going to sell the watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I viewed it. I thought the heartbeat thing was to make every doctor call a development agency and say, I got an idea. That to just drive that demand of, well, wait a minute, if it can do that, I wonder if it can do this.
The other thing that goes along with the heartbeat and the different tapping that you can do on the watch and things like that, it's almost Apple has a way of leading your. If you pay attention to the little things that they tell you, you can kind of get a sense for where they're going. A few months out, and that was witnessed last year in their developer conference during the summer. They said, hey, we have these new things called size classes that let you make your apps respond to different device sizes. I don't know when you would need that, but you might want to do it, because then in the fall they announced a phone that was much bigger and it actually has iPad-type layouts and landscape. And the way I see some of these heartbeats and the taps, they're showing off that little taptic engine, what they call it, inside. And that's a different mechanism than the actual, than the vibrating that our phones do these days. It's a different engine that drives that. It's much lower power, and they even implemented it in their trackpad for their new computers. So after their announcement, they actually put that in their new MacBook Pros, not the new fancy one they showed off with the 2 ports or whatever, but their actual MacBook Pro Retinas. Well, there's a headphone one on the other side. Whatever. They announced that as part of their new MacBook Pro lineup, and I stopped by the Apple Store in Philly on that week, and it was in there already. And just playing with that trackpad, it's entirely different feel, and it's you have the ability to control the amount of feedback you get from the trackpad with software, and you have different gestures that you can do with that engine. When you touch it really hard, you can tell. When you touch it very softly, you can tell. And it seems to me that they're saying, this is a thing we're capable of now, and if you pay attention to this, you can use it in new and interesting ways in your apps. We're not going to tell you exactly what to do with it yet, but this is what we can do with it. And I see that as another version of them saying, here's a new thing to play with, developers. Figure out what to do with it.
So then from the teaching side of this, students may get the perception phones are kind of passé. I just want to skip ahead and learn wearables. I don't want to have a mobile development degree. I want to have a watch development degree.
Don't do that.
Yeah. So skills-wise, what do you say? Like, how is wearables going to kind of alter that path? Because students enrolling now, they have probably 21 months. So that's a lot of time for wearables to develop. What skills are going to be even more critical as these wearables take off?
I'd say trying to get transferable skills, since we don't really know, like we can all make predictions on what 24 months from now the new thing is going to be, but like Josh pointed out, we thought the new thing was going to be the Google Glass, and then it wasn't. So getting the basic skills that you need for development, and also understanding how to transfer those skills is probably more critical than just picking a device that you say you're a developer for.
I'll take that one farther and say that 24 months ago, Objective-C was looking great. It was looking great, but not so much now. In 24 months, I'd be surprised if Objective-C was still around. So that, and that's even software side. So don't tie your heart too closely to languages.
I'll say 24 months before that, you were still a student and the web degree didn't exist.
Almost.
So I think that's important, though, because he's on our Wearables mobile panel today, and he's a grad of WDD, right? One of my, if not my first student, I think, here at the school. Then when you enrolled, you didn't have that option. I certainly didn't. You certainly didn't. She certainly didn't. The mobile degree didn't exist. Mobile didn't exist, right? So not only do we not know where wearables are going, we don't know where anything is going when you really think about it. So one of the things that we make sure we do from a curriculum standpoint, you mentioned WWDC and they announced Swift, kill off. The next day, our phones are ringing off the hook hey, are we learning Swift? Yeah, absolutely, sure, why not? So we had that curriculum up and running in October. I mean, the language was announced publicly for the first time in June, and we were teaching in October. The reason that our instructors are able to do that is because they have that foundational skill, those transferable skills that they can apply to new things. And I've had to have that my entire life. You know, we learn languages in college that don't exist anymore. No language that I learned in college still exists. I mean, when I was in college, JavaScript was horrible. Everybody had JavaScript blockers. Can you imagine trying to use the web these days with a JavaScript blocker? Yeah, good luck. Hope you like Yahoo.
Revis would disappear.
Yeah, I mean, JavaScript has gone from an annoying advertising delivering language to basically a language that is able to fulfill every role of the web process, from the server side to the client to the front end. So, I mean, I think I agree with what everybody said, but I think the most important thing is that you know, you learn how to learn. You learn how to teach yourself. And the way that you do that is by learning what to look for, how to look for it, and then how to apply context to whatever it is that you're learning to actually accomplish something.
So the core of development will be the same, but what about the user experience side? And learning that side of it, is there anything we've been able to glean from the first wave of wearables that is going to be more or less important, or more that students need to focus on? Because, you know, now that we're dealing with taptic engines and all of these sorts of things, are there skills within user experience that are now going to be more in the forefront than they were?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed, even from my personal use, I used to wear Pebble. I bought one like maybe a year and a half ago to try it out and see what it was all about. For me and a lot of others, notifications aren't enough, and it definitely helps a lot of situations. I put mine on when I'm traveling through airports, because I'm generally carrying a lot of stuff, and I don't, you know, necessarily want to take my phone out all the time as I'm walking through airports, hustling plane to plane or something like that. So in that context, notifications are enough. But in everyday life, I'm not wearing one anymore. I think they do need to go a little bit farther than just, you know, keeping me alert of different notifications, because that might not be compelling enough for a lot of people. That probably is for a lot of the people in this room, because we're generally like technologically minded and things like that. But for people that are slightly outside that circle, I don't think it's enough. And I think these devices really do need to come into their own and stand as a device that does something on its own, and not just a companion device. You know, it needs to warrant its own appeal, and it needs to say that it has a place in someone's life in order for it to be something that they will wear past that initial honeymoon phase of the purchase.
I would add.
No.
I would just add to that, thinking about like your example of the Pebble, thinking about the number of devices that are available means that when you're developing, you really need to think about the user experience, because once you lose a customer, you're pretty much done with them. You know, like when there was just the iPhone and then, you know, a couple of different Android devices, we didn't have as many choices, but now it's like you have the Apple Watch and all of the different Android watches and the Pebble, and different people are coming out with different things all the time. So it's really going to amount to what the user experience is like, and of course the advertising, but we won't talk about that. But the user experience is going to be really pivotal, you know, for whether or not your device is something that gets widely, universally adopted or not. So that's a really big concern, I think, even more so than it used to be, because now people aren't just stuck with whatever you give them, they have more choices.
I always think about text messaging when this question comes up. And, you know, you asked me a decade ago, you know, I was the guy that was going, why would you ever text somebody? Just pick up the phone and call them. I hate calling people now. So, I mean, I think about that kind of stuff. You know, you say notifications isn't enough. Yeah, probably not on its own, but I think you start thinking about some of the interesting technologies that we're on the verge with, or that we're just now starting to experiment with. You know, you got beacon technologies and those kind of things. So I think part of it is also integration, like life integration. So when I go, you guys have, if not, you should seen Minority Report, right? You know, a lot of that was researched to be technologically accurate to about the year 2050. So if you think about it, you know, when I go to the mall, and this is where that privacy thing comes in. When you go to the mall, it's like, hi, Josh, you know, what are you interested in today? And it has some suggestions. You see that already. They're doing it behind the scenes without you knowing it online with the ads that they serve you. But I think once you get to that personal level where you show up at the mall and it's doing it like right there, people are still not quite comfortable with that. So I think a lot of things, as the privacy expectations and the comfort levels change, and we start allowing this stuff to integrate, you'll start to see some of those explosions too, is life integration. So I go to the airport, and you travel all the time, right? Well, notifications aren't enough, but what if it told you what gate you're at? That's another add-on. What if it told you your flight was delayed, so you might as well stop and get a Cinnabon? Remember, I'm fat. So, those kind of
And then
things.
your heart rate goes up. that other one.
The blood sugar.
And then when you eat
Yeah,
it,
your blood
it's
sugar.
reminding you that you need an insulin shot and to visit your doctor next week. I think that integration part of it is where a lot of this is coming, and it hasn't quite got there yet. And a lot of it has to do with that comfort level. A lot of it has to do with that privacy. So once we start to accept the technology as part of who we are, and it'll start taking off and those kind of things.
Integration is something else. I'm thinking about integration the other way. With right now, they are companion devices, these watches, and the integration from the watch back to the main device is pretty important. And I think a lot of the reason that I didn't necessarily stick with the Pebble or anything is that it was kind of only one way. It was phone out to the Pebble, and I'm excited for I have to buy one for work, the Apple Watch. So I'm excited to try it out because it is two-way. I can do things on the watch that get back to the phone as the workhorse to send off. I can dictate to it. I can do things that get stuff back to the main device. So in the phase when these are still companion devices, I think it's very important that, and this is the tricky part because it's all kind of proprietary, that there's not an Android Wear watch that integrates deeply with iOS or anything like that, and vice versa. The Apple Watch isn't going to be able to have that integration with an Android phone. But I think that's a key thing in this phase that we're in now. And so I think if you're going out to build something for the Apple Watch or Android Wear or whatever, make sure that it's not just a one-way kind of interaction between those apps. Make sure that there's a little value you're providing each way, because in different contexts, you're going to want to be able to do something on either device and have something appear on the other.
I think we're still stuck with watches too. I mean, both iOS and Android have a lot of telematic type opportunities. So you have the car, CarPlay with and Android Auto. Those are, I don't want to say wearables because I don't think you wear a car, but
Car wears you.
yeah, the car kind of wears you, but it's the same.
So we're becoming wearable.
Right, where we are. Oh, effectively, our phone is currently becoming like kind of this thing that's like a hub of technology. So I go and I get to my car, I get to the mall. The idea of wearables isn't wearables. It's that seamless integration of technology and human. Mm-hmm. So I mean, when I get into my car, it knowing because I searched for it online that I'm going to one of my favorite restaurants, and having the GPS in time to travel and telling me I don't have enough gas or whatever to get there. It's all those kind of things. It's that I don't have to. As humans, we're on this never-ending quest to stop thinking. So once technology can do all that for us, it's that whole. If you haven't seen WALL-E, that's another good movie to watch.
As you're driving to the restaurant, it can tell you to stop to get more insulin too.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of where we're starting. We're just starting. We're at the very precipice of this actually happening, and I think moving forward, you're going to see a lot more of that, where it's just we accept it a little bit more and allow it to convenience us a little bit more.
I've seen something related to what Josh just said, where they talk about our technology now as like an extension of our unconsciousness. And I think when you ask about what students should be thinking about when it comes to user experience and UI and UX design and all that, that you have to think about the fact that you almost have to try to predict human error before it happens if you want to be really successful. Like, you have to be able to think, basically, I probably shouldn't say this, but what kind of stupid thing would they do with this, and try to stop them from doing it before they do it, before you get a lawsuit or before people start complaining about how it wasn't designed well. It's like, okay, while I don't think anyone should do this, there's probably at least a handful of people who would, and I am often that person who will take the tech where it shouldn't go. So I can say I'm guilty of it too, and that's why I always tell students and developers who are just friends of mine, like, think about potential human error.
Technology in general, it's funny you mention that. We were talking a little bit earlier, you brought up the point about Angry Birds. And for the longest time, oh God, that was a pain. Angry Birds was like ubiquitous with mobile dev. You're gonna build the next Angry Birds. It's like, I hope not, But But really what that technology has always been driven by a couple different industries, right? So you have military, first and foremost, so military applications to things. Porn is number two, and then it's there. I mean, that's just what it is. And then gaming, right? Those three things, probably in that order, drive a lot of technologies. And it's hard to look up any kind of technological evolution without seeing those three industries being prevalent, right? So Google Glass, you weren't allowed to do the porn thing. That was against the TOS. I read it. The gaming thing was cool, and it was starting to take off. You had a lot of kind of like augmented reality, VR type things with Google Glass, which were allowing like virtual paintball, we talked about last year, those kind of things. And military, even, I remember in the Glass panel last year, somebody it was a firefighter, I think, in the audience, that was really talking about the potential professional application of that and having real-time statistics that are floor layouts of a building and that kind of stuff on the thing. That was a really, really interesting idea, and I think that has purpose. So, a lot of the things that we're talking about here with health and everything like that, yeah, that's cool, but what's really going to make the leap is probably that thing that ties into one of those industries. If it's probably going to be gaming. With wearables, or military with health, like being able to track your soldiers on the field, finding those kind of things, seeing what they see. You can find out how intense a combat situation is by getting the collective heart rate of all your soldiers or something like that. There's a lot of really cool applications for those kind of things in those industries. And I'm kind of interested to see kind of where it goes. Obviously, I'm trying to be a part of it with my medical practice. But at the same time, people are using this in a whole bunch of different ways.
I was going to ask why Oculus Rift hasn't come up at all as a wearable. I think that's really interesting because, this is an augmented reality headset that has been primarily used for gaming, but they got bought by Facebook not too long ago. And that's been kind of strange to me because I'm very interested to see where that goes. We have a network of, 1 billion people now on Facebook that just bought one of the most advanced augmented reality technologies, and you wear that thing, and nobody seems to be talking about that as a wearable, which is very interesting because that has military aspects to it. You can instantly be either looking out of a drone, seeing someone's actual viewpoint from where they're at. You could, hypothetically be looking through the scope of a sniper rifle to actually do some research on that thing. It has gaming functionality. Could have porn functionality.
They actually.
They probably do have porn.
They do. They actually.
They do.
They actually just did a test with the elderly of testing what their medical conditions were during a VR session.
More insulin. More insulin.
Get that out of your head.
I don't know what version of Call of Duty that is, but I don't want to see that.
I think the reason why I was kind of staying away from the Oculus is because, for the most part, it's like immersive VR, and I don't want people walking around with their vision only being, although I know that they can do some things with see-through cameras and all that. So I think it is probably something that we could talk about, especially when you look at the Samsung Gear VR actually has a feature where you can turn on just basically see-through and then make it augmented reality. And we were testing it out in our office a couple weeks ago, and talking about how in a few months, remember I said about human error, in a few months we'll probably see some idiot driving down the road because they have this see-through and they feel like it's safe to do, and it's probably not a good idea just yet.
Yeah, one of the devices I'm actually testing right now is it's called an Epson Moverio BT200, and yeah, it's so sexy. What's interesting about it is, the glass project that I'm working on, we're testing a few different lenses, the Oculus and those kind of things, and we're kind of settling in on this. I think you brought up a good term for wearables, whether it's an immersive wearable, a la, the Gear or the Oculus or this. I would consider the Moverio also immersive, even though you can see through it. And then seamless wearables, where they just kind of fit into our lives. And I think those are actually two different industries with two very different applications. And so we try to overgeneralize things, and we talk about what's in stores now with the Gear, the Gear Watch, Android Wear, what will soon be in April, the Apple Watch. Why they didn't call it the iWatch is annoying, I don't know. But
Eye is dead.
yeah, its eye is dead. That's sad. But I mean, I think that those are two different categories of things. So I think with it comes down to who your audience is, right? And I think defining whenever you define a problem, we say technology is evolved by problems. One of the biggest parts of defining a problem is defining who it's a problem for. And if you're trying to do one without the other, just defining some problem, the chances are it's not a ubiquitous problem to everyone. It's to a very specific, demo. And you want to make sure that whatever it is, the device fits not only the problem, but the demographic.
That's an important thing to note too. We keep thinking about wearables in the current state of technology. We keep thinking and comparing it to the iPhone release and Android proliferation. Got it. We keep thinking about it in terms of those things that have come out. Tablets becoming a thing that people actually use rather than what happened to them in the 90s. But this is much more comparable to the computing industry in the 70s. When it was still kind of obscure about what you were actually going to do with it, and it was still, that guy has a computer and he does I think he does some word processing on it. It's kind of cool. I should check it out. But nobody really knew what to do with it yet until word processing actually took over and became the thing that people realized that they want that computer and that PC in their house because they actually do need to do word processing. And spreadsheets were massive. But we need to start thinking about wearables and where they're at, not the mid to late 2000s technology scene, but think about it in terms of where technology was at in the 70s and how that found its way into people's lives and how it was completely kind of looked down upon at first. Not that I was there, but nobody really knew what to do with it yet in their own house, but eventually we all have them in our pockets.
It's really funny you mentioned that. Out of college, I was involved with a startup called One Control Home Automation, and I was their senior interface developer, and we were building home automation technologies for PDAs, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is a precursor to mobile devices and tablets, palms and those kind of things. And what we found was that we actually had things working like piping security system surveillance to a PDA and whole home DVR, a whole bunch of the technologies that are just now becoming mainstream. And a lot of it was just that. A lot of it was that at the time, the technological and cost barrier, I think you said, I have one more expensive device to add to my list, right? The cost barrier prohibited a lot of people from getting into it. Same thing with the iPhone, right? When it first came out, it was like $600, $800, depending on which one you got. And then for a lot of people, it didn't matter how many things it solved or didn't solve for them. They didn't have $800. Android Wear, this watch is one of the cheaper ones at $249. That's still a lot. This is a big ask of somebody that says, I have a watch. I don't need notifications for $249. So you start to see some of the technology advance and the prices come down. You see the audience grow, and the audience grows, the number of problems to solve grows. And a lot of that growth in the industry is going to come from that kind of stuff. Much like the growth in people that had these smartphones and people that had tablets grew. So now all these home automation technologies that we even had working, before 2000 are just now becoming mainstream and are just now being adopted by people. So that's part of it too.
Well, and speaking of back in the good old days, are we returning to client-server software? Is the web cut out of this? One of the things that's kind of glazed over in the Apple Watch announcements and some of this is that there is no browser. So now in order to get to a wearable device, you're going to have to go through the app side. You're going to have to go through installed software. Are we going back to, pre-internet web app stuff and back into installed software with just the cloud computing being the mainframe?
I don't know. I think, back then when it was smart server, dumb client, even our dumb clients today are very smart. And they have a lot of things that they can do that, the servers can't. They have all these sensors that we've been talking about. And those are things that, whether or not, you're mentioning the point that no computing actually happens on the Apple Watch. It's all happening on your phone, and that display is actually just getting rendered out to the watch. So it's not doing any computing of its own, but it's able to pull in all these different things from the sensors that it has and things like that. So I don't know that it's necessarily, smart server, dumb client, but smart server, smart client app, maybe dumb things that have sensors, and all these things kind of tie together in interesting ways, but I don't know that it's necessarily a binary operation like that.
I think if you look at the way the web has evolved, it started with flat HTML. You didn't have anything, and then user heuristics came into play, and you had design and CSS, and then it became dynamic content, which was big, where you could actually have something uploaded and change on the fly. Then it became asynchronous dynamic content, or you had like Ajax and that kind of stuff, and where servers have progressed to now, When you used to write e-com sites back, 2000, 2005, in that time frame, you had a lot of kind of integrated server calls. So, you're like, I'm going to build this table, and then I'm going to build this ad, and then I'm going to build this form, and they had multiple server calls, and the model for that has changed a lot. Now you have, even in current web development, you have a front end and you have a back end, and you have these full stack engineers that are doing the server side, and then the API, and then the front end that's going to consume the content. That back end still needs to be there. There isn't a mobile app that I know of that doesn't use some kind of back end. Even a game, which is like all front end work, you have the back end components with the reward system, certificates, achievements, social elements where you're sharing things. That has to happen through a back end. You have the API call to get data down to a weather app, and you need to go to some place that actually knows what the temperature is and pull it back down. As far as the front end goes, yeah, I think you're going to see a little bit of a shift, especially with Apple Watch. I think Apple Watch is actually going to be a huge kind of motivator to people to get away from web front end. But it's not going to go away, because there will still, if I'm writing a book report, I'm going to sit at a computer and I'm going to go through and I'm going to follow links on Wikipedia to the actual sources where the real data is. Did you hear me? Get that information and pull it down, and I'm going to take the time to do that. I'm not going to do that on my watch. I'm not going to do that on my phone. So you're going to still have the web there, but when I get that text message or whatever, it's a 1 byte dynamic kind of digestible content piece that comes to my device. Yeah, that's going to be native, and that whole web experience is going to change. You saw that with Facebook. Facebook started with a web interface on the watch, and then it doesn't implement all of the heuristics and usability awesomeness that comes with the phone. Just the custom views and the buttons and the interactions and the gestures and everything. So they migrated, not to mention it was a little bit laggy, right? That said, the Glass project that I'm working on now actually uses a Node backend, and it pipes data through a Node backend straight to my client. And actually, the reason why I'm not launched with the project yet is because Android version 4.1.2 doesn't support WebSockets. So I have a lot of problems on that side where I have a browser that just doesn't support WebSockets, and that's actually holding me back. So I still need those developers, and I still see a need for that technology on the website, because a lot of everything, I believe yesterday in the panel about full stack developers, I think Revis actually pointed out that a lot of the data is still transferred over HTTP. So as long as that's the case, you're going to need that browser component or the socket to accept that data in some form and digest it.
Well, thanks, guys. I think we're ready for questions, if anyone has any. Someone will be walking around with a microphone. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Karim Ahmed Shams. I'm in music business. I have a question in regards to how you were saying the mobile is an extension to the human consciousness. And I think we live in a really exciting time. It's like almost sci-fi, and even evolution is like accelerating at a really fast pace we can't catch up. Do you see it happening soon that we combine nanotechnology with neuroscience and biology so that we make the mobile, instead of being an exterior device, into something interior, integrated in the human body in the future anytime soon?
That's a really good question, and I've seen a little bit of that in research labs already. Like if you look on the internet, for instance, there's a case where people have, for other reasons, not for gaming, but for other reasons, they've had different electrodes implanted into their brain, and they've found that they could have people control World of Warcraft with the electrodes that are in their brain, like just thinking about the movement. So I mean, like we're already seeing that these things are becoming possible. So absolutely, I think so. And I think really, like when we talk about technology solving human problems, that's exactly what we're looking for. I mean, and so much of it is driven, I feel like, by our imagination, which is why you guys all being here is awesome. And like comparing things, like we think about the holodeck, the ideas we get from Star Trek and ideas we get from like books and movies, thinking about synchronicity and all of this stuff. It's like, for sure, we're in a very exciting time. I agree.
What is a book?
The book Synchronicity.
You said book? A book?
A book.
I just want to add on to that real quick. Privacy, I think, is the answer to your question, right? You can't have this happen until people are comfortable with it. The contact lens is a good first step. It reads blood glucose levels and your eye teardrops and everything like that. But once people become more and more comfortable with this kind of stuff, you'll start to see it, propagate a little bit faster. We have 3D printed prosthetics now. I'm saying as a culture, I don't think we are. I think it's the same reason Google Glass is where it is right now, is because we just weren't ready for it from a privacy standpoint. There's going to be the mom of the sick kid that wants that kid cured, and that person's going to be okay with it because it saves their baby. But I think as a society, we're a little bit kind of callous and afraid of that because we don't know what's going to happen. You get movies like Terminator and that kind of stuff, and people, you got to understand, whenever you do a client interview, you have to understand these people. They're not necessarily, like he said, on the same level as us technophiles, where we're kind of cool with this stuff. There's a little bit different. So once you can overcome that, and you can show people the good side of things, and there are stopgaps in place to prevent the bad side of things. I think you'll see more of that.
I think that was in Terminator, actually. It didn't work.
Well, there's always plot, and then I welcome our new cyborg overlords.
Other questions?
Hi, good evening. I'm Zaid from Computer Animation. I just wanted to ask you guys if you could tell us a little bit about virtual assistants and where is it now and where are we going with it?
Like with CA, you're talking about gaming specifically, like augmented reality.
It's on phones. You can see in a couple. I don't like Google Now, I guess, or Siri, Cortana.
Okay.
Virtual assistants.
A virtual assistants. Okay. Where are we now? We're at a point now where we get mad at a device for not understanding us properly, sending that data to a tower, which then sends it to space, moves it to where it needs to go, gets data, and comes back to us 30 seconds later because that's far too slow.
With a word we've never said before.
Right. Yeah. I think it's amazing in terms of when I was in high school, probably Dragon Dictate was just coming out like as a thing, and like you had to spend 2 weeks training it to even be able to type the quick brown fox. It was terrible. And now, you expect anybody to kind of sit down and talk to a phone and just know what you say, and when it doesn't, you get mad at it. And I think there's a lot more integration. I think a lot of, I hate to beat a horse, but I mean, it all comes back to privacy too. Until we're willing to allow it to understand more of us. Think about how creeped out people get about Google Now. It's like, you're parked here. How do you know that? That kind of stuff. I think once that kind of stuff gets a little bit, people can become more comfortable with it over time, and then they start telling it, okay, where should I go for lunch today?
I want to add something to like what you keep saying about privacy, because I feel like part of the privacy issue hopefully will be addressed by the fact that people realize that we really don't have it anyway.
That's true. I mean, there's features of those assistants like Siri that people already won't use because of privacy. Like, people don't realize that you can actually tell Siri, this person is my mother. And then from then on, not use their name and just say, call my mom. Yeah. And it will actually, like, attach those sorts of things.
If you ever just say, hey Siri, real loud in a room, just see what you can do. I'm telling you. Hey Siri, tweet, insert anything there. And you'll probably send out 3 to 4 tweets.
That was another problem with Google Glass.
Yeah.
I had a lot of people try to search for various nefarious things on my Glass. Joe.
Turn that off.
I didn't search for anything. You were on a hangout with Glass, and I said, okay, Google, and just like, and it fired off something. I'm like, this is great. Wear that thing to work all the time. Other questions?
I don't know where the microphone is.
Go to Mike somewhere.
I have one from online, from Kevin Fry. He asks, on wearable technology, do you think that audio will play more of a role in the development than the visual aspect of wearables in being able to talk to your device, to respond to text, play music, etc.?
Yes. Anyone else?
From a high level, yeah. I mean, definitely. I find myself, when I'm driving, I said about safety and everything like that, I'll find myself tapping in front of my watch and just replying real quick. Yeah, no, I'll be home in 15 minutes or something like that, rather than, try to whip out my phone real quick at a stop sign and text it back. So yeah, I mean, as virtual assistants become more prominent and better and more easily to recognize you, I know Google Now migrated a lot of their engine into the Core OS now, so you don't actually have to make a web call, so that made it a little bit more responsive, a little bit more accurate, and that kind of stuff. Siri's obviously gotten a lot better each iteration of iOS. So as that becomes better and better, people will use it more and more, as long as it doesn't become socially awkward and you have people shouting weird things to your wife.
I think in general you end up in a place where there is no interface for a lot of things we're going to be using, whether it's voice. I mean, Touch ID, the fact that my fingerprint is like typing a sequence that is unique to me. I think we're going to get to a lot, like we all are familiar with a web interface or a mobile app interface, and we kind of expect it, but there's going to be a lot of systems that come up that, yeah, the interface is just that we're here at all, or what we said something, or we said some sequence of words. I mean, my banking app is now updated so that I can either have face recognition or say a certain sentence that it knows it can identify me with. There's no interface for that. I don't have to type in a password.
What sentence is that?
What?
What's your sentence?
What's my sentence? It's the same sentence for everyone. It's just it knows your voice. That's what's creepy about it.
I think
So-
context is the thing that you're getting at, though, because I see my phone as my virtual assistant, and there's different ways to interface with it. I don't think that when Siri came around, then I finally had a virtual assistant. I had one all the time that could take notes, keep track of calendars, to-do lists. But there's certain situations and context where the interface that I want to use is vastly different. Texting exists because there were situations when if Josh and I wanted to talk, he was in a situation where he couldn't talk on the phone, so we would text about it, right? But now we're with dictation. It's possible that I'm in a context where I really want to use, my actual spoken language to talk with Josh, but he's in a meeting or something and actually can't respond by talking. So I can talk and send a text to him. And in his context, he can actually read and respond with text itself, because there's certain things that he can't do in that situation. Or if, in this sense of passwords and things like that, you're never gonna say your password out loud unless you're in your house alone or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's just
that's another thing, that as the systems get faster, both the network speeds and the processing. I mean, it was 3 or 4 years ago, there was an app where you could sit across the table from someone who spoke a different language, and it would translate for you. And it was intended for business, so that you could just fly into Germany and speak in English, and the phone would then spit it out in German. Well, it didn't catch on terribly well because it was slow. It wasn't natural, but it will be, and I'm sure it is much better now. And so those sorts of things, you could literally think about graduating from college and taking a job in another country, or for that matter, starting a business in another country, because your devices then just added 45 languages to what you speak. I mean, those are completely new opportunities based on interfaces that have nothing to tap on. So
yeah, Goggles from Google actually does the same thing with written text. So that was one of my favorite things about glasses. Walking around, I could read anything, and it would just overlay English right on top of it. So there's some really cool stuff, and I see a couple wows in the audience. And unfortunately, a lot of this is, it all comes back to the technology died because people weren't comfortable with it, and they didn't understand some of the cool stuff that you could do with it.
Josh is just bitter because he got thrown out of a conference for wearing Google Glass.
This is true.
And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. That's an awkward email to send. So, boss, I got kicked out of a conference.
I get an email. I was thrown out of the conference. And it's like, what now? I thought he fought a guy. It was actually because he was wearing Google Glass, and the security guy just said no. And it was really strange because cameras were allowed, and Google Glass wasn't. And there was never really a good reason. I just love the story. But, it was that thing of it wasn't comfortable to the person in charge of the event, and that was the end of the, so therefore, that's it. Even though that could have added a lot to the experience, especially if everybody at the conference had them, it didn't matter. That was the end of that conversation.
I think on that question that was just asked about voice or visual input and output, I guess, I would say I have to voice myself because I'm an outlier, maybe, because I really don't like talking to my devices, which is kind of funny since I'm supposed to be a tech person and I like different interfaces, but it always feels really awkward to me. And I guess as a user experience person, I would say, well, maybe we should do some research and find out if it's because of me, or if it's because I need to learn more, or if it's a personality style, that maybe there's a group of people that exists like that. And maybe someone has done this research, I don't know. But since you guys are all saying that you're really liking being able to talk to your device, I just had to voice the fact that at least one person does not feel that way.
I honestly only use dictation. Like, I almost never use Siri itself. Actually, there's one thing. You can turn on and off all of your alarms at the same time. Which I have to set a lot of alarms to wake up sometimes, so I like to do that. That's the only thing I use Siri for.
You know, if you hear what Anthony said though, and Aleshia at the same time, what they're really saying is that the interface is going to become separated from the action, right? So Anthony can talk to me, I can get the text, I can text him back, and then his device can translate that back to audio if he wanted to, right? So the actual user input becomes different, and maybe that changes, and maybe that becomes an implant in my head, so I'm neither talking or typing, I'm just thinking and it's showing up on my screen. You know, where we're going from here is however you want to interact with the device, it's got to make sense to you as a person and as an individual to accomplish the task, and then separating that interaction from the actual action that you're doing. There's gonna be a lot of jobs in that, like just HCI and thinking about that exact kind of flow.
I can hear you. I'll repeat it.
I have one question for you guys. With the introduction of Health Kit and Research Kit by Apple, and eventually taking over the health stuff, isn't it a good time for us as students to begin like encouraging in more advanced computer science stuff? Like, for example, I know that Lund University uses neural networks to find heart transplant donors and match their recipients. That's a concept that can also be applied in mobile applications. For example, for dating, you can actually go and analyze the data bring by the sensors, like heartbeat. I don't know what other things it can be done. So do you consider like including that kind of stuff in future iterations of the program, like going into more advanced computer science topics?
Is that really a more advanced computer science topic or just another way of interpreting data? That's actually really creepy when you think about it, right? So I take somebody out to dinner. I'm married, so that's not going to happen. Just for the record, my wife is probably watching.
You don't take her out to dinner?
Yeah, I might take her out to dinner, but then that's equally creepy that way too. So if I'm wearing my watch and then the other person's using an app to find out if I'm really engaged in the conversation, right? I could use it as a teacher student, right? I check all your watches and I find out you're all asleep in the middle of my lecture. I'm like, okay, crap, I got to do something to speed this up. Yeah, the sensors are another form of data input, right? So, and this goes back to kind of all the HCI kind of privacy conversations that we've been having, is that you're going to have to start to think outside the box, outside of the typing, outside of the talking, and start to think about all the other data points that we can access to round out that user experience or to take advantage of different pieces and metrics that we didn't have before. And then that is going to show us new avenues that we can take with some of this technology. So, yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And obviously, one of the things that we do in mobile development, I think to answer your question about like from a curricula standpoint, the curriculum is open, right? So we kind of encourage people to you know, there'll be an introduction to a topic and a concept, and what you do for the assignment is up to you. So, you know, I think a lot of people, much like Apple does with dropping hints and kind of giving a little tool and saying, what will you come up with this? I'm always really excited when a student takes what we've taught them and applies it to something else. We had a student build a Bluetooth controller for a what do they call it? It's not coming to my head right now. They're Arduino, an Arduino tank, and that was like totally awesome because, you know, all we did was introduce them to the concept of Bluetooth, and they took it and said, okay, I'm going to build this with it. So yeah, you're going to have all that kind of stuff, and I think that's awesome to think about. And again, though, that's a little bit creepy, right? You don't want me to know that you're falling asleep, or if you get really excited when I'm talking about something, that might be more creepy.
And for the record, it was a little toy tank. We don't have anybody in mobile controlling tanks. Sorry.
That you know of.
I know that's disappointing. Other questions?
Oh, well, I was also going to
sorry,
add,
go ahead.
because I teach in a different program, so in game dev and I think software dev students also take AI, and in AI they talk about neural networks. So it is something that's available, and I'm pretty sure you can take classes outside of your program if you are interested.
Good question.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sheldon Hill from Computer Animation Program. First off, thank you guys for coming down here and sharing all this plethora of information. Very much appreciated. My question is, would you say that developers are the driving life force in making wearables a success? More specifically, I had an experience when I came here to Florida 5 months ago from Wisconsin. Came with my big sandwich bag full of change, came to the tow line, all these people are just whipping through. I'm like, what's going on? How are these guys just going through? Come to find out there's this thing called the Sun Pass here. You can link up with a card and go through. It's black magic to me.
Right.
So what if in our society of first world problems, we value convenience as a priority. It's way up there on the line, convenience. So say we get this technology out to people just based on the fact that they love notifications. They love knowing that they got an extra like on their Twitter feed or something like that. Then they encounter real world problems. Say I go out and I get this watch and I'm crossing through this tow line and I got this Sun Pass and all of a sudden maybe I don't have enough money on my Sun Pass. I know they have that reload feature, but say I got like a push notification on the watch. Says, hey, you're low on this. Do you wanna try that? And then I don't know anything about developing programs and stuff like that for mobile, so I tell somebody about it and they go, man, we can do something with that. We can make that two-way interaction, like you said earlier and stuff. Do you think that as that kind of keeps growing, that can be the foundation for making successful wearable tech?
I think developers are certainly necessary, but your example kind of proved that it's you that makes it useful.
Yeah.
You came up with the problem there in that situation. You were in a situation that you needed the technology. I could build a really cool watch app, and if no one used it, nobody cared about it, it wouldn't really be compelling and it wouldn't catch on at all. So I think it's much more about what people are interested in and what problems they have that they bring to us and bring up to us and say, I have an issue, whether it's going through a toll booth, whether it's getting diagnosed with whatever disease you may have, that they're doing some research on you. They can attach a few sensors and get the data out that they need over a 3-day period or something. There's those situations that are going to arise, and developers need to be ready to respond. So I think it's always good to keep up on the latest technology that you can use, because you never know when you're going to run into somebody who brings up a really good idea.
Yeah, I think.
Oh.
Okay. Well, I think Aleshia and I like to talk at the same time. I think I like to talk all the time, but I think you're in CA, and CA is also one of those really cool degrees in my mind. I'm always fascinated by CA, and I think we talked about augmented reality, we talked about VR and those kind of things, and one of the things that I think Full Sail does really well is we kind of talk about the how intertwined all the degrees are, right? So somebody's going to come up with that app at a mall. You talk about Minority Report, and you go and it scans you and it shows you, okay, I want to look like what I look like in this shirt. I'm going to need an animator to build a model that I apply some data to, and the models for all the shirts and everything like that. And I think actually all the degrees in some way are going to benefit from mobile. It's not just developers. So developers, yeah, they're going to build the app that actually goes on it, but they're going to be using assets and back-end technologies and art from all areas of tech, and it's going to be like, I don't know that I could actually definitively say one's more important than the other, because you're going to need them all. Because if the interface isn't there, why is Apple so popular right now? It's because they have the sexy, it all comes back to that. It looks better, it sometimes behaves better, and people got accustomed to that experience, right? And that's only going to maximize the experience if you have all the technologies involved.
And I was just going to add, kind of related to what both of them just said, I saw a session yesterday where someone asked the question, what makes a good designer / developer? And the 3 panelists there said, excellent communication, which I think is kind of what you were highlighting when you said you have a concern or a problem, and a good developer / designer hears that problem, and then, first of all, hears it, and then also communicates it, like you're talking about, to animators, whoever's on the team, to actually create a solution based on what they heard. So I think that what you're doing is the right way of approaching it.
Yeah, I think it also relies on those connectors. It relies on people that are able to explain what the technology is capable of. It relies on people that can, like, especially in a bottomless pit like SunPass, that's layers of government, that's all sorts of bureaucracy that you have to get through just to get a mobile app built, and then add on some extra features. but it's all those different specialist areas that then also have people that can connect it to, what else can we do here? And so, like you all being here is important, not because you're going to suddenly dive into Xcode or Android Studio and start building a wearable. It's so that when you're developing in CA, your work, you understand where else it might end up. So I think that's all part of it. We're out of time for questions. Thanks you all for coming out, and I hope you enjoyed it.